The old Victorian house was already collapsing when we arrived. Flames devoured the sagging porch, their orange tongues lashing through shattered bay windows as thick black smoke swallowed the pre-dawn sky over Portland. The kind of fire that steals your breath before your boots even hit the pavement. Dispatch said the place had been vacant for years, just another condemned property on the outskirts of town. Routine call. Routine job. Until I heard it beneath the roar of burning timber and the shriek of stressed metal. Not a cry, not a shout, but a whine. I pitched. Terrified. I pivoted hard, training overriding exhaustion, and followed the sound toward what remained of the sunken kitchen. The heat pressed against my turnout gear like a living thing, the air so thick with embers it stung my eyes even through my mask. Then I saw her. A brindle-coated pit bull mix, maybe 4 months old, wedged between the wreckage of a collapsed pantry and the warped remains of a cast-iron stove. One ear was badly singed, her muzzle streaked with soot as she trembled against the blistering floorboards. When our eyes met through the smoke, something inside my ribcage twisted. She didn't bark. Didn't scramble toward me. Just lifted her chin slightly, like she'd already accepted this was how her story ended, but was willing to be wrong. Easy girl, I rasped, dropping to my knees as a ceiling beam groaned above us. We're getting out. The debris had her pinned at an angle that made extraction a nightmare. I wrenched aside smoldering 2x4s with gloved hands, ignoring the way my shoulders screamed in protest. When I finally got an arm under her ribcage, she went utterly still, not frozen in fear but consciously suppressing her instinct to thrash. As I lifted her, she tucked her face against my oxygen tank like she was trying to hide in the hollow of my collarbone. Outside, Rodriguez's voice crackled over my radio. LT, you got a victim? Negative, I coughed, staggering into the smoke-choked yard. Got a survivor. Her claws dug into my turnout coat as the morning light hit us, not scrambling for purchase but clinging. Like if she held on tight enough, the world might stop burning. Then I saw the tag dangling from her chewed leather collar. Not a name. Just one word stamped into the metal. Grace. I didn't know it then, but that battered tag would become a promise we'd spend the next year keeping. The emergency vet's eyebrows vanished into her hairline when I refused treatment. You've got second-degree burns along your neck, she argued, pointing at the blistering skin above my bunker gear. She's worse, I said, nodding to where Grace lay motionless on the stainless steel table. The fluorescence highlighted the damage, third-degree burns across her flank, paw pads shredded from scrambling on hot coals, one whisker singed completely away. But her chest rose and fell steadily beneath the vet's hands, her dark eyes tracking my every move from across the room. Miraculous she didn't inhale more smoke, the vet murmured as she flushed Grace's wounds. Another 5 minutes in there. I swallowed hard. The ghost of those flames still licked at the back of my throat. She's resilient, the vet added, smoothing antibiotic gel over Grace's burns. Fighter spirit. I reached out instinctively when Grace whimpered. Her tongue darted out to brush my fingertips, once, twice, before she rested her chin on my wrist. Not licking. Not nipping. Just confirming I was real. Yeah, I whispered. She's Grace. When they shaved the matted fur around her injuries, the collar came off completely. The vet handed it to me without comment. That single word gleamed dully under the clinic lights. Grace. Not a name on a tag anymore. A challenge. A benediction. They kept her overnight for 4 fluids and oxygen monitoring. I slept in the waiting room plastic chair, my fire coat wadded up under my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her watching me through the smoke, not pleading, not panicking, just waiting. Like she'd been holding her breath her whole life and I happened to be the one walking by when she finally needed to exhale. At 5:47 a.m., a vet tech shook me awake. She's asking for you. Grace stood stiffly in her kennel when I approached, her tail giving one solemn wag before stilling again. The moment I unlatched the door, she pressed her entire body against my shins like she was trying to merge with my shadow. Miss me, tough girl? I scratched behind her surviving ear. She responded by gently taking my wrist in her mouth. No pressure, just holding, before releasing me to lick the inside of my elbow. A pit bull's version of a pinky swear. I signed the discharge papers with my non-dominant hand because she refused to stop leaning against my right side. The receptionist smiled as Grace methodically sniffed every inch of the lobby. She's cataloging, the woman observed. Building a mental map that includes you. The thought lodged behind my sternum like a swallowed stone. My apartment smelled like stale coffee and regret when we walked in. Grace limped across the threshold and immediately began her inspection, nose to baseboards, pausing at door frames, lingering near the couch where my ex's indentation still lingered in the cushions. She didn't growl at the empty spaces. Didn't whine at closed doors. Just moved with quiet deliberation, as if memorizing the architecture of my loneliness. I'd prepared a nest of old blankets by the radiator, but she bypassed it completely in favor of collapsing across my boots as I sat at the kitchen table. When I shifted to pour kibble into a bowl, she didn't follow, just watched with those bottomless eyes until I returned, then rested her muzzle on my thigh as if to say eating is a group activity now. That night, I dragged my mattress onto the floor beside her makeshift bed. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to find her standing over me, her warm breath puffing against my cheek in the dark. Not begging. Not anxious. Just checking. I lifted the blanket in silent invitation. She circled twice before wedging herself along my spine, her heartbeat thudding against my shoulder blades like a second pulse. The last time someone had touched me with that kind of uncomplicated trust, my mother was still alive to see me graduate the academy. Grace wasn't just healing from physical wounds. There was something deeper in the way she startled at slamming car doors, how she'd freeze when the tea kettle whistled, the military precision with which she avoided the stove despite never being burned by it. The fire had left invisible fingerprints on her psyche, ones I recognized because they mirrored my own. The first time it rained after the fire, she stood at the sliding glass door for 43 straight minutes, tracking each droplet down the pane with military focus. When thunder rattled the building, she didn't cower or pant, just turned and walked deliberately to my home office, where she proceeded to dismantle my laundry pile with surgical precision. By the time I found her, she'd arranged my sweaters into a perfect nest atop a cushion of mismatched socks. "You're not subtle," I told her, kneeling to scratch her favorite spot between her shoulder blades. She responded by draping herself across my knees with a sigh so deep it vibrated through both our skeletons. That's when I noticed she wasn't destroying. She was rebuilding. Creating order from chaos in the only way she knew how. The firehouse barbecue was supposed to be a low-key welcome back after my medical leave. I hadn't planned to bring Grace, but she'd planted herself between me and the front door with the determination of a concrete bollard. That the famous fire pup? Captain Ruiz asked as Grace executed a perimeter sweep of the station's grilling area. She paused to sniff each firefighter's boots in order of seniority before settling against my calf. "Grace, meet the family," I said. Her tail thumped the pavement exactly once, a dignified acknowledgement. It was Nguyen who spotted it first. "She's mirroring your tells," he observed as Grace positioned herself slightly left of center at the picnic table, precisely where I always stood during briefings. When I crossed my arms, her ears pivoted backward. When I rubbed my neck, a nervous habit since the fire, she leaned harder against my leg. "Creepy," joked Hernandez through a mouthful of burger. "Imprinting," corrected Ruiz. "She's learning how to be your shadow." Grace proved him right 3 hours later when the alarm blared for a 3-car pileup on the interstate. Before I could react, she'd already trotted to the rig and sat at attention beside my designated door. Not agitated, not fearful, just ready. Ruiz gave me a look. "She's got the job down better than Proby." We compromised with Grace riding shotgun in my personal truck to the scene, where she waited patiently while we worked the extraction. It wasn't until we loaded the last patient into the ambulance that I noticed. She hadn't taken her eyes off me the entire time. The Children's Hospital called it animal-assisted therapy. Grace called it professional cuddling. From the moment her therapy vest went on, she transformed into a 4-legged diplomat, greeting each wheelchair and 4-pole with equal reverence, intuitively understanding which patients needed gentle snuggles and which required respectful distance. 8-year-old Mateo hadn't spoken since the apartment fire that killed his younger sister. He'd refused all counseling, all art therapy, all medication, just sat by the window tracing the same pattern on the glass for hours. The nurses warned me not to get my hopes up as Grace and I entered his room. She approached at the speed of growing grass, finally coming to rest with her chin on the edge of his mattress. 27 minutes passed before his small hand emerged from the blankets to hover over her head. Grace didn't move, didn't nudge, just breathed steadily until his fingers finally made contact. "She smells like campfires," Mateo whispered, his first words in 11 weeks. Grace's tail swept the floor once. Slowly. Deliberately. Like she was painting his words in gold leaf. By summer, Grace had her own badge from the therapy animal program. The certification photo showed her sitting ramrod straight, ears slightly askew, her scarred flank turned just enough to catch the light. I framed it beside my Fire Academy graduation photo. 2 different kinds of survival. Our first official assignment was the first responder wellness retreat upstate. Grace moved through the lodge like a furry therapist, identifying the most withdrawn cops and firefighters with eerie accuracy. She'd park herself just within their peripheral vision and wait, sometimes for hours, until they reached for her. Retired Battalion Chief O'Reilly hadn't taken his antidepressants since losing 2 crew members in a warehouse collapse. He sat stone-faced through every group session until Grace laid her entire weight against his prosthetic leg during a coffee break. "Damn dog," he muttered as his fingers sank into her fur. His shoulders shook just once before he pulled her into a bear hug, his face buried in her neck. Grace tolerated this breach of protocol for precisely 14 seconds before squirming free and depositing her favorite chew toy in his lap, an honor previously reserved only for me. The veterans' PTSD unit was harder. Grace circled the rec room twice before zeroing in on a Marine corporal who'd been staring at the same Sudoku puzzle for 40 minutes. She didn't approach directly. Instead, she flopped onto her side exactly 3 feet to his left, close enough to touch, far enough to ignore, and began the most elaborate ear-cleaning session I'd ever witnessed. 20 minutes later, his pencil clattered to the table. "You train her to do that?" "Do what?" I asked. He mimed licking a paw. "The whole, 'I'm not looking at you but I'm here' routine." I shook my head. "That's all her." The Marine, Kowalski according to his chart, studied Grace for a long moment. "Afghanistan." "Portland," I said. "Abandoned house fire." He nodded like I'd given him classified intel. When Grace finally rolled onto her back, exposing her burned scars, Kowalski surprised us both by sinking to the floor beside her. They stayed like that for the rest of the hour, his palm resting lightly on her rib cage, her tail thumping whenever his breathing hitched. Grace's crowning achievement came at the burn center's annual picnic. 7-year-old Naomi, 70% third-degree burns from a kitchen accident, had refused to leave her room for weeks. The nurses had prepped me for rejection as we approached her wheelchair. Grace took one look at the girl's bandaged arms and promptly dropped into a play bow, not her usual dignified greeting, but the ridiculous, tail-wagging, tongue-lolling version she normally reserved for squirrels. Naomi's visible eye widened. Grace responded by sneezing dramatically, then flopping onto her back to expose the vulnerable pink skin of her belly. "She's silly," Naomi whispered to her oxygen tank. "The silliest," I agreed as Grace commenced what could only be described as an interpretive dance involving her own tail. When Naomi finally reached out, bandaged fingers hovering inches above Grace's chest, my dog went preternaturally still. Not the tense freeze of fear, but the absolute calm of a creature that has chosen to be vulnerable. The moment Naomi's gauze-wrapped fingertips grazed her fur, Grace let out a contented sigh that seemed to ripple through both of them. Naomi's mother burst into tears. The nurses exchanged disbelieving looks. Grace, for her part, simply rolled upright and rested her chin on Naomi's knee, an unspoken promise to stay. We visited the fire site on the anniversary. The lot had been cleared, the debris hauled away, but the earth still remembered, patches of scorched soil stubbornly refusing to grow even weeds. Grace sniffed each boundary post with solemn intensity before returning to sit pressed against my shins. "We made it," I told her, scratching the spot behind her ear that always made her back leg twitch. She responded by leaning harder into my touch, her weight a grounding force against the memories rising like smoke at the edges of my vision. That night, I found her standing on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in wildfire hues. When I joined her, she didn't turn, just shifted slightly to accommodate me against her flank. We stayed that way until the first stars appeared, her warm body a constant pressure against my thigh. The next morning, the Portland Fire Department issued Grace an official service badge. The ceremony was brief, just the crew gathered around the rig bay as Chief Ruiz clipped the laminated ID to her vest. Grace accepted the honor with characteristic dignity, waiting until the applause died down before sneezing directly on the chief's freshly polished boots. "Still a mutt at heart," Ruiz laughed, wiping his shoes on the back of his pants. Grace gave him a look that clearly said, "You're lucky I didn't pee on them," before trotting back to my side. Her badge gleamed in the fluorescent lights, not just a marker of what she'd survived, but a testament to what she'd become. The call came at 4:13 a.m., apartment fire with possible entrapment. Grace was already waiting by the door when I emerged from the bedroom, her vest gripped gently in her teeth. "Not this time, girl," I said, kneeling to buckle it anyway. Her tail wagged twice before stilling, her version of professional mode. The scene was chaos when we arrived. Flames chewed through the third-floor windows as crews laddered the building. I was halfway through my size up when a neighbor grabbed my arm. "The Robinsons' kid," she said something about a cat. Grace strained at her leash before I'd even finished processing. I unclipped her with a silent prayer. She vanished into the smoke like she'd been born to it. They found her 7 minutes later, curled around a shivering calico in the least damaged corner of the master bedroom, her body shielding the smaller animal from the heat. The moment fresh air hit them, Grace stood, staggered, then carried that damn cat down 3 flights of stairs like it was her sworn duty. The calico, dubbed Ember by the crew, spent the next week convalescing at the station before being adopted by Proby's little sister. Grace visited every Sunday, tolerating the kitten's enthusiastic face biting with the patience of a saint. Now as I write this, Grace is snoring at my feet, one paw twitching as she dreams, her scars silvered in the lamplight. The fire took pieces of us both, but here's what it left behind. A woman who remembers how to love without flinching. A dog who turns survival into service. And the unshakable certainty that some bonds are forged in flames so they can light the way for others. Grace's story began in the fire. But it didn't end there. This story moved you, pay it forward, adopt, volunteer, donate. Every creature deserves their chance to rise from the ashes. Be someone's grace. Be someone's light.